Hello, everyone. We are going to wait for 1 minute to allow participants to join, and then we will start. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Department of Energy's SBIR STTR Program Office webinar. This is the webinar, the FOA webinar for FY24 Phase 2 Release 2. My name is Zina Al-Yusuf, and I will moderate today's webinar. Today's presenter is the SBIR STTR Program Director, Manny Oliver. Manny will provide an overview of the background and impetus of the DOE second Phase 2 awards, Phase 2A or Phase 2B. Third Phase 2 awards or Phase 2C, and the application process. We will conclude with a question and answer session. So during the course of this webinar, you may submit questions via the Q&A box located at the bottom of your screen. And Manny will answer these after the presentation as time permits. If you have a question relating to the technical content of your proposal, please submit those questions directly to the Phase 2 Program Manager. And lastly, we will post the recording of the webinar and a copy of today's PowerPoint slides on the DOE SBIR website under Funding Opportunities webpage. Manny?
All right, thanks, Zina, and welcome, everybody. Again, as Zina mentioned, today, this webinar is about Phase 2, and specifically about Phase 2A, 2B, and 2C. And I will be going through those awards, discussing those in a little more detail. We do have a little longer introductory section today, just talking about what's new for Phase 2 applications, because we have made some changes since some of you may have applied for your say first Phase 2 or Phase 1 a few years ago. So there have been some changes. Some of those changes affect both Phase 1 and Phase 2. Some are just for Phase 2. I did want to mention that as well. So, and then we'll spend some time talking about the second Phase 2 awards and the third Phase 2 awards. So just in terms of just introduction to these different, how we run the program. So you get a Phase 1 shown here and say year 1. You only have one chance to apply for Phase 2, and that's the following year. You get your Phase 2, and that's typically a 2-year award. At the end of your Phase 2, you will have a chance to apply for either a Phase 2A or 2B. And we call that the second, or it's the legislative terminology, sequential Phase 2 award. And you'll note that you can get a Phase 2A award or 2B immediately after your Phase 2, so there's no funding gap. But you can also apply a year later for the Phase 2B, and we'll explain why that gap is there and the difference between 2A and B a little later in the terminology, later in the presentation. And then after you complete your 2A or 2B, you will have a chance also to apply for a third Phase 2 award. So you can see we can fund you over this entire range. And we'll have some numbers as well, talking about how many we fund typically in Phase 2, 2A, 2B, and 2C. So I did want to just start and back up a little about just the Phase 2 application process. We do have a new Phase 2 application webpage on our website. We should just have it on Phase 1. And again, a lot of the Phase 2 application mirrors what you do in Phase 1. So if some of you are wondering why we don't have a initial Phase 2 webinar, is because many of the same things you do for Phase 1, you're just, again, doing in Phase 2. You're submitting the application, LOIs through PAMS, letters of intent through PAMS, submitting applications through grants.gov. Most of the, the requirements for the application are all really the same, although you put a lot more detail in certain things like your commercialization plan and your phase 2 application, project narrative, again, because these are bigger awards and you're asking for more money. And I'll talk a little more about some of the new requirements, some of which only apply to phase 2 in just a minute. There are plenty of resources on our website, just as there were for phase 1. Some of these, for example, for your phase 2 commercialization plan, there are new requirements. Again, we typically try to restrict you to just 1 or 2 pages. Maybe we can go up to 3 or 4 on the phase 1, but in phase 2, it's limited to 15 pages, and most people actually use most of that time to really put in a compelling commercialization plan, because that's a significant part of the evaluation for phase 2. So some things in there are like a return on investment template that is required, a pro forma template, looking at some of the near-term revenue streams and costs. We do have a level of effort worksheet out there as well to help you make sure you're still compliant with the level of requirements for SBIR and STTR. And then another new thing to be aware of is that some of you, if you're funded by certain programs, this is outlined in the funding opportunity announcement, your phase 2s would be cooperative agreements instead of grants. And if you're doing a cooperative agreement, again, it's a small percentage of you, but please look for it in the funding opportunity announcement. You will actually need to submit some milestones that will be achieved in the first year of your phase 2, including a second or third phase 2 award. So just be aware of that as well. Although this doesn't directly apply to phase 2, we did put a new online application guide. In the past, we had a PDF guide, and also the FOA, funding opportunity announcement, contains a lot of information. We've shifted that over to try to put most of those resources online. It's a little easier for you to search and find information just on a specific topic. So I just want to make you aware of that as well, so that instead of having to look through a PDF, and if you have some questions, this online guide, feedback we've heard is that it's a little more convenient to use. So you can just click on the section shown here on the right that you need, and then go through and find the information you need that you have any questions. And of course, all throughout this, if you have any questions, you can always call or email us with questions. Now for phase 2 and phase 2A and B and C, I did want to indicate that you can still get technical and business assistance for 2A, 2B, and 2C awards. This is not limited just to the initial phase 2. Again, just like the initial phase 2, it's up to $50,000. Again, this is over and above the award amount. So if you have a $1.1 million award limit for phase 2, you can add $50,000 above that and request a total of $1.15 million. And again, there's more information on the types of commercialization services you can use. And just a reminder, this funding is currently limited to using third-party assistance. You cannot use the $50,000 to pay your own staff, for example. So again, here are the different categories. If you want to do more market research, you're paying somebody to assist you with meeting regulatory requirements. Intellectual property, if you want to hire a patent attorney, help you file a patent, work with, again, somewhat with marketing or pitching to investors, and other expenses. So those are discussed in more detail in the funding opportunity announcement. I do also want to point out, perhaps depending on when you got your first phase 2, you may, the way we're collecting your commercialization history, so if you've had prior SBIR, STTR phase 2 awards from any federal agency, not just DOE, you must provide the company commercialization report from SBIR.gov. You should be reporting. This helps Congress understand what's going on with the results from SBIR and STTR awards. Your follow-on investment, sales, and so on from your awards to SBIR.gov into this company commercialization report. This way you can only do it one place. Just do it at SBIR.gov for all agencies, and you can just print out a PDF of that and submit that with your application. There's no need for you to keep your own spreadsheet and so on and do that anymore. So, so if you haven't done that and you have past awards, and all of you will have had past phase 2 awards since you're applying for a 2A, 2B, or TC, and you should probably go in and get used to understanding what that is. In some cases, it may be very recent awards, so you don't have any commercialization report. But for those that have resulted in follow-on investment or sales, you should report that. Unfortunately, where you attach that to your application is different. If you're applying for SBIR in both, you put that attached to question 8 of the SBIR and STTR information form. If you're STTR only applicant, that goes in field 12 of the research and related other project information form. There is information in the funding opportunity on terms of how to generate the company commercialization report. Something we implemented in 2023 was the requirement that was, this is something that came out in the SBIR and STTR Extension Act of 2022 that basically requires agencies to understand the foreign relationships of the SBIR and STTR applicants and awardees. So there's a new form on our website to do that. If you have not filled that out before, it will go through a series of questions and asking about what your foreign relationships are. These are not necessarily specific to your award. These are, specific to your business. So if you have foreign relationships related to other things that you do, you need to report those. And again, this is very important. If you don't submit this form, you could be declined without review. Showing here, you attach it to field 12 in your form. Even if your answer to all the questions is no, that you don't have any foreign relationships, we need to know that. So don't assume that you don't have to fill out the form. You do. Everybody has to fill out the form. So please do that. This is probably something that hasn't changed. So we just want to remind you that to mark all your proprietary data. Again, proprietary data is, from the government's perspective, data that you generated using your own funding. And that you want to treat it as, and this may be financial information, this may be technical information. You don't want us to disclose it. Again, we do treat, I always try to mention this point, we treat your applications as confidential. We generally are not going to disclose that. Just the one thing you have to be aware of is that we can get the government, any part of the government is subject to Freedom of Information Act requests. And somebody may ask for an application that you submitted to DOE. And again, because of you've properly marked your data, we can redact all of that confidential information. So that's why we're asking you to do that. And some documents like your commercial, the company commercialization report, the foreign relationships disclosure may have proprietary information, but you do not have to put legends on those documents because they have already pre-populated with data protection legends. You do have to mark, for example, your project narrative, and your commercialization plan. And you do have to put certain legends, and you should copy these legends verbatim and use them on your form. There's a certain legend you need to use on the first page, and then you can use the second legend shown here for all the pages that contain that proprietary information. And again, you cannot use a footer that covers everything because not everything in your application is confidential. So the other challenging piece of this is that you do need to put the legend on the first page, the big legend, and the smaller legend on just those pages that contain confidential information. And we have some guidance on our website about how to do that and the different ways you can mark it. This is a requirement that's new for 2024. So unless you've applied already to our Release 1 applications, you may not have seen this. This is a new requirement from the Office of Science that we sit in, and that is a PEER plan. PEER stands for Promoting Inclusive and Equitable Research. Office of Science required this in FY 2023. We, because there's some challenges in updating our application requirements in PAMS and some of the other issues there, we are rolling it out in 2024. And so this addresses many different pieces: diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility. All those are part of the PEER plan. And the Office of Science has implemented this to just ensure that applicants are paying some attention to this opportunity to be more equitable at how the research is conducted. So just in terms of what it is, you're going to need to include this in your proposal. It's not a separate form. You're just going to put an appendix in the project narrative. It's limited to 3 pages. And it really should be focused on, very project specific. You are all small businesses. If you were a large business, you can't just pull down the, diversity and equity policy of your large organization and just plug that in. You're going to need to get specific about how you're addressing it for your project and the people that are involved in your project. So I did want to point that out. You can't use some corporate, for those of you who are bigger small businesses, maybe a few hundred people, you can't just use some corporate diversity statement and plug that in. The peer plan is part of the evaluation of your proposal now. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And then again, I want to point out you can request funds as part of executing your peer plan. Again, depending, tailored to what you plan to do. And then again, the complexity detail of the peer plan, it doesn't have to be 3 pages, it can be much shorter. It really just should relate to basically the size and scale of the project. So for phase 1, typically it's a much smaller project, much fewer people involved compared to phase 2. So that would scale. Now, all of you are submitting phase 2, so it'll probably be on the more substantial end. So again, in terms of how you would focus your peer plan, it could be your project team and partnering institutions, again, making sure it's the project, not the company as a whole. It can be sort of the whole idea is here to make sure that the research and the environment is very professional, accessible to everyone. And so it can focus on that aspect. It can include, equitable aspects of the research project, and that can include what you're working on. Some of you are working on things like clean energy. Some of you may actually be working on cleaning up past, pollution and things like that in your project. Those are things that, in a sense, address equity, because sometimes those people who suffered from that in the past, have been some of the disadvantaged communities. You can also address this by partnering with underrepresented institutions or underserved communities. So things like minority serving institutions, historically Black colleges and universities. In terms of the review process in the past, these were our 3 major review criteria. With the inclusion of the peer plan will now be added to that. It will not count as much as the 3 primary review criteria. It'll be lesser weight, but it is still part of the review. So the reviewers will be looking not only at the technical information, but also your peer plans. Now, again, what you can include is pretty wide-ranging. And so here we are just providing some examples. These examples are not intended to be exhaustive. You can come up with whatever you think is appropriate for your project and what you're working on. And again, we can't give you an exhaustive list because there could be quite a list. So these are just some examples. You don't have to do any of these, but just going through them quickly. So it could be involved in mentoring underrepresented persons who are involved in your project. You might want to hire underrepresented interns or staff. I would point out that we do have a diversity supplement for phase 2 that some of you may be aware of. This allows you to bring in an intern on the second summer of your phase 2 award. You might provide professional development training to those underrepresented persons. You might provide education related to supporting diverse and innovative work environments. This could be diversity training for your staff. Again, as I mentioned, you could partner with underrepresented institutions. And you might include, for those of you working on improving sort of clean energy availability, for example, for underserved communities, you can get involved with some of the businesses that are helping to try to roll out those technologies to those communities. That'll be another example. Here are some additional ones. I guess I won't read through them all, but you will get a copy of the slides if you want to look through these. These examples shown here, for example, include things that are very project specific, whether you're working on reducing, improving energy efficiency in homes and things like that can particularly benefit underrepresented or disadvantaged communities. Another new requirement, and this is for FY 2024, is a cybersecurity self-assessment. This was part of the legislation passed in 2022, asking agencies to do a better job of protecting, making sure that SBIR firms are not being taken advantage of by foreign countries. So that's why we have the foreign disclosure form, but we're also being required to evaluate your cybersecurity practices to ensure that you're doing a good job in protecting your company's proprietary information from cyber attack. So as part of that, we do have a new application requirement. You will actually fill out a cybersecurity self-assessment and submit that with your application. That is described in the funding opportunity. We will have a webinar probably in the next month to spend probably about an hour and go over this new requirement. So I just want to make you aware of that. You'll get an invitation to the webinar if you're eligible to apply to this funding opportunity announcement. We did the same webinar back in the fall for phase 2 release 1. So if you want to get a head start, you can go ahead and look on our funding opportunities page and look under the phase 2 release 1, and you'll see this cybersecurity self-assessment for phase 2 applicants webinar that was held in November. And it covers the new requirement in some detail. Again, I mentioned this before, but our phase 2 funding opportunity announcements include a phase 2 diversity supplement. There's nothing for you to do right now if you're applying to this phase 2 funding opportunity announcement. We're just making you aware of this, that if you apply to this one, then in December of not 2024, but 2025, you can apply for a diversity supplement up to $20,000 to sponsor an intern in the second summer of your phase 2 award. So I just want to make you aware of that. And there is more information about this in the funding opportunity announcement, but again, no action required for you at this time. This is just for awareness. Okay, so we're going to get a little more into the meat of what we're talking about today. And this is for those of you applying for second and third phase 2 awards. So we'll start with the second phase 2 award. We have two versions. There's a 2A and a 2B. And there are different motivations for the 2A and 2B. So for the 2A, the primary motivation is that you started out with this ambitious phase 2 proposal, and when you got into the research, you found out that perhaps the scope of it, the cost required was more than you could accomplish in your phase 2 award. So hopefully during the course of your phase 2 award, you are communicating with your program manager, and so they're aware that, hey, under their certain one of their topics, there's some challenges because not everybody can apply for a phase 2A award. So if you received a phase 2 award, only a select number of you will be able to apply. And if you look in the funding opportunity announcement under phase 2A, it will tell you which topics and subtopics from our phase 2 awards from 2 years ago will be able to apply. And again, the reason we implemented this is oftentimes we see people just, if they only had a phase 2 and didn't complete the work, many people would just cycle back and try to get a new phase 1 and phase 2 award. And that would really slow things down. So we're providing these 2A awards to allow you to really, push ahead without any gap and complete that research. Now, again, if you don't need any money and you just need more time, you can request a no-cost extension. So if you're in a case where your research was delayed for some reason, but the cost is still adequate, you're just behind schedule, that's why you have no fund extensions or no cost extensions for your awards. And as I mentioned before, this would be something you're applying to right now so that there's no gap. You will just finish your phase 2 award and then start your phase 2A award. So there is no, the intent here is not to have any gaps and allow you to continue that work. Okay, the motivation for phase 2B is actually different. Phase 2B means that you actually successfully completed your phase 2 award. So just remember that. Phase 2A, you didn't complete it. Phase 2B, you did complete it. And for phase 2B, what's often you may discover in the course of completing your research that there were some additional product requirements you weren't aware of as you started to talk to customers and want to move this toward commercialization, that you need some additional research that you had not even thought of when you submitted your phase 2 application. And so that's the purpose of the phase 2B is really to extend the research that of the phase 2 so that you have a better chance of commercializing the technology. Again, the difference for phase 2B is you do allow you to submit toward the end of your phase 2, but you can also wait a year later. And that's shown in this slide. So, for example, if you got, again, showing a phase 1 in 2021, phase 2 in 2022, and here we are in 2024, and you want to continue the research, well, continue research, but on some new items that you hadn't defined in the past, you would apply there. There's also a possibility of getting a gap. So, for example, under phase 2, if you just did a no-cost extension for some time and want to complete that and apply next year, that would be fine as well. Now, for both phase 2 and 2A and B, the maximum award amount is 1.1 million for 2 years, independent of what your phase 2 award. Some of you may have had larger phase 2 awards of 1.6 million. All phase 2A and 2B awards are maximum 1.1 million. And sometimes we get the question of, like, do we set aside money for phase 2A and 2B? And the answer is no. We have one phase 2 solicitation. All the phase 2, A, B, and C come in at the same time, and program managers are really allocating funds based on where they think they're going to get the most impact. And again, there's no target number of awards for either phase 2 or 2B. Everything, again, depends on how many applications come in and the quality of those applications. Now, here we're just showing some of the tables that are in the funding opportunity announcement. So as I mentioned, for 2A, you're going to need to look through here and see if your topic and subtopic were listed here. If they're not listed here, you would not be eligible to apply for phase 2A. If you have any questions about this, please email us, call us. If you didn't see your topic there and you talked to your program manager and they thought they'd put it in, let us know. So again, this is just the specific topics that were eligible for phase 2A from the different program offices. A little quickly, I'm not, if you know your topic, you can look to see if it's there, but if not, you may need to look at these slides afterwards or look in the funding opportunity announcement. In terms of, do we change the review criteria for phase 2A, 2B applications versus phase 2? The answer is phase 2A is largely identical to the phase 2. The only difference is that, for phase 2, we're evaluating your phase 1 project performance. For phase 2A, now we're reviewing your phase 1 and phase 2A performance. Again, the same thing, 3 major review criteria, all equally weighted, in addition to the peer plan. Now, this for the phase 2B and our FOA, it will indicate that, if you got an award from either a 21 or a 22 release 2 FOA funding opportunity announcement, you will be eligible to apply. So unlike phase 2A, where only selected topics can apply, for phase 2B, if you got funded, you will be able to apply. And the technical review criteria are the same, but I wanted to point out for phase 2B, since you should be further along toward commercialization, the impact criteria is now weighted much more strongly. So compared to phase 2A and phase 2 and 2A, where these 3 were equal, now the impact is going to be probably equivalent impact, weighting to both the technical merit and the ability to carry out the project combined. So it is significant. Just a reminder, just like you did with your initial phase 2, you do still need to submit a letter of intent. Again, no feedback provided on the letter of intent for phase 2 applications. We just need to know what's coming in, especially with phase 2A or 2B, because it's completely discretionary. We do expect most of our phase 1s to apply for phase 2, Whether phase 2 applies for 2A or 2B, we don't really know that until you send us a letter of intent. Again, that helps us make sure we line up reviewers in advance so we can review our applications in a timely fashion. I did want to point out that there's a challenge with no-cost extensions because we are setting this up so there's no gap between your phase 2 and your 2A or 2B. You cannot put in a no-cost extension here that would prevent us from giving your 2A. So for example, those of you applying for this phase 2 release 2, your grant start date is September 10th for this phase 2A award, for example. For phase 2A, there is no possibility of doing a no-cost extension because the end of the fiscal year is actually September 30th. If you are still running your phase 2 well past into what turns out to be FY 2025, which starts October 1st of 2024, you cannot get an award. Okay, so just very important. Some of you may be tempted to start putting in no-cost extensions to your phase 2 award, but if that extension goes beyond September 10th, you may not get your phase 2A award. And the same thing applies for the phase 2B awards. You cannot extend that, put in a gap. Now, for example, if you have a phase 2B award that was awarded in 2021, then you had a year gap here. So you can have a no-cost extension here for the phase 2B where you was awarded in this should be 2022, I believe. You don't have that opportunity. Some of you may be interested in what are your chance of success in terms of applying. Here we're showing the numbers from 2023. These can vary from year to year because you can see for some of these we don't get as large a number of applications we do get for the initial phase 2 compared to the second or third phase 2 awards. So for example, for phase 2A, we only got 40 applications last year, made 17 awards. 2B, 66, made 16 awards. Phase 2C, we only had 1 application. So one of the questions here we often get, if I'm eligible for phase 2A and 2B, can I apply for both? And the answer is no, you can only submit 1 application. As I mentioned before, for phase 2A, you're telling us you didn't complete the initial phase 2 and you're requesting more money to complete the original scope. For phase 2B, you're asking for money to expand the scope. You really aren't really eligible for both because you're either in one category or the other. You either completed your phase 2 or again, by the end of your phase 2, or you didn't. If you apply for phase 2A this year and you don't receive an award, can you apply for phase 2B next year? The answer is yes. If I apply for phase 2B this year and don't receive it, can I apply for phase 2B next year? The answer is yes. If you were, again, provided this first application was the first year of your eligibility, you have that second year of eligibility. You may still want to talk to your program manager to understand, why they didn't fund your application to make sure that you're not wasting your time submitting again in the future. And if you receive a phase 2A award, would you be eligible to get a 2B award in the future? And the answer is no, because we can only issue 1 second phase 2 award per phase 2 project. So I'm going to touch on the third phase 2 awards. And again, hopefully we'll still have plenty of time for questions. Phase 2C is actually called the Commercialization Assistance Pilot Program in statute. And then Congress actually mandated that if an agency gives second phase 2 awards, that they make these third phase 2 awards available. Their motivation for doing this is primarily related to, again, increasing the commercialization outcomes associated with these awards. Many of that's detailed below. I won't go into all the details for that. But again, this is taken right from statute as to why Congress is requesting agencies to implement this program. Now, there are some major differences with the third phase 2. One is you have to have received a SBIR phase 2 award, and for DOE a second phase 2 award. So you have to have both. And again, we are only issuing, as I mentioned at the beginning, the phase 2C award to come right after your 2A or 2B award. So you don't have an opportunity to apply for this, a year or two in the future. If you're in the second year of your phase 2A or B award, that's the time you need to apply. And the major thing here is that the phase 2C awards are limited by Congress to SBIR program, not STTR. So if any of your phase 1, phase 2, phase 2A or B are STTR, you would not be eligible to get a third phase 2 award. Just want to be clear on that. It's SBIR only. Again, these are the timelines again, as I mentioned, phase 2C has to follow your 2A or 2B award. So the major difference with phase 2C is you're, again, applying for more R&D funds. I want to keep that in mind, that the SBIR and STTR programs fund research and development. We don't fund commercialization other than the technical and business assistance that we provide. And so the purpose of the matching funds is for you to work with an investor who is going to fund some of that commercialization work that we are not funding. And so you have a lot more latitude with the money that you get from your third-party investor than you do from DOE. For our money, you're always going to be doing research and development. I did want to point out that to be an eligible third-party investor, it is limited to the following: a small business concern other than the applicant, essentially. So you cannot provide the matching fund. Your small business cannot. It can come from another small business. It can come from a venture capital firm. It can come from an individual investor, and it can come from a government source, but it can't come from SBIR government source, and that includes phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3. Or any combination of the above is fine. So that is very important. It is very restrictive. You can't get funding from, say, a large corporation. That's excluded. This is not a DOE decision. This is all written out in statute. And so we cannot expand the eligibility for the investors beyond what the statute allows. So again, following up on that, some other details here: you can't use your own internal R&D funds. You can't use things other than cash. So somebody can't say, I'm going to do an in-kind contribution, or other, I'm donating this equipment, things like that, as part of this. And again, the other restriction is funding can't come from the existing owners, family members, or affiliates of such owners. We think this is very restrictive. Doesn't really make sense to keep current owners from adding more funding, because again, they usually don't want to dilute they may not want to dilute their equity in your firm. But that again is excluded by statute. And again, any type of debt obligation is not considered eligible as well. So very restrictive in terms of matching funds. If you're thinking about this, please be aware of that before you prepare an application. So the other restrictions of the matching funds, so they need to be available at the time you receive your award. They also need to be contingent on receiving your award. So Congress put out this program to attract additional private or government funding to your award. So if you already have, an investor contributing funds, and that was already essentially awarded to you, that is not an eligible source of matching funds. You must have something that's contingent upon receipt of a phase 2C award from DOE. The matching funds also have to be expended during the period of performance of your award. So you can't say, I've got a matching fund and I'm going to start spending it. I've already started spending it right now. No, it's again, because it's contingent on your award, we need to see the money at the beginning of your award, and you need to expend it during the award. Now, keep in mind, because this does require a minimum of 1-to-1 matching, if you don't spend those matching funds during your award period, but you spend the full amount of DOE award, DOE can actually request to return the money that you didn't match. So make sure you spend the matching funds in parallel with the funds that you were getting from DOE. And again, if you want to get a no-cost extension of that, you can do that as long as you didn't fully expend all your DOE funds. Again, just like the 2A and 2B, the maximum amount is 1.1 million up to 2 years. Again, no set aside for any phase 2C awards. As you can see, we get a fairly limited number of those. Some years, I show we had one application last year, but in some years we've gotten up to maybe 6 or 8 applications for phase 2C. And yeah, there is actually a restriction on the amount of funding we can use for phase 2C awards. We can only spend 5% of our SBIR funding for phase 2C awards. We haven't run into that restriction, but I just want you to be aware that this is one of the things that is capped. And again, no target number of phase 2C awards, all depends on quality of the applications. I say historically, I believe we have funded somewhere between 40 to 50% of the phase 2C awards, even though last year was 0 for 1. Again, just like the phase 2A and 2B, you do need to submit a letter of intent. And we have the same concern about no cost extensions. Your phase 2C grant, if you apply for one, would start on September 10th. You cannot extend your 2A or 2B to go beyond that date. All right, so that brings us to the end. Again, just some other things if you want help with. Again, Carol Rapke in our office, who's one of our technical market advisors, helps with partnering. We also have Dave McCarthy, works on the technical and business assistance piece. Again, just if you're not already in our mailing list, this presentation is usually given by Eileen, so she's provided her contact information there. She does all our outreach presentations. She's in Thailand at the moment, so not able to give the presentation, so I'm doing that today, but if you want to reach out to her as well. So, and again, here's our general email address for any questions of any type. So I will stop there and open it up for questions.
Thank you, Manny. The first question reads, regarding phase 2A, we have a lot of money left over from our phase 2 budget because one of the entities we subcontracted with was not able to complete their work. Is it acceptable for the company to spend some of this money on project expenses since our original budget was inaccurate? And as the last 6 months of the project, the project play out, we see the need for other supports and costs that were not obvious at the start.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
to answer that part of the question, so yes, you can rebudget funds, and typically the rule of thumb is you can rebudget up to about 10% of your funds without requiring DOE approval. And again, this is going to be in your award terms and conditions. When you receive the award, there's a little paragraph that talks about that. The paragraph also talks about the things you do need to come back to us and get approval for. So if you are going to swap out one subcontractor for another, that's something that we would need to approve. If you are going to change any key personnel in the project, that's something we would need to approve. So go through and look at that list in your award terms and conditions. If it's not really substantially changing things, if you are taking a different tact on the research, like you're going to do work on something you didn't mention in your application, it's probably a good idea to, again, contact your grant specialist, just saying, hey, we're planning to do this, and is there any issue with that? They may forward that to your technical program manager just to get approval on that, say, yeah, that looks fine, and this way you don't have to worry about it. It's all approved by DOE. You know, I would say on anything that you do, if you ever have a question, it's always better to send a note to your grants manager saying, I wasn't sure if we need to get approval for this, but we're making this change, please let us know, and they can come back to you and say, there's no requirement for you to get approval for that. That's within scope of your ability to adjust that.
Thank you. What happens at the end of our project period when we have money unspent? Can we still apply for a phase 2A, or do we have to take a phase 2 extension? Would this unspent money carry over what happens at the end of the phase two if the level of effort is skewed against the company?
Yeah, okay, so there are a few questions in here. So, when you have unspent dollars, so again, I just want to remind you that, the way these grants work is these are reimbursement type grants. In other words, you are supposed to be reimbursing yourself for costs incurred. So at the end of any grant, independent of what phase it is, if there's unspent money left, that money is returned to DOE. So it is put in an account for you to spend, to incur expenses if you reach the end of your project and there are unspent funds. And this happens routinely. Companies have routine unspent balances, and those funds are returned to us. We actually use them on new awards. So we basically recycle that money and put it into new awards. So you can have unspent funds. Again, you will need to make a decision on what's the best course of action for you to take. If you have a significant amount of unspent funds, you may want to do a phase two extension, and you may want to do a 6 or 12-month extension and not apply for a phase 2B until next year. You might be eligible for phase 2A now, but if you have a lot of unspent funds, it's going to look a little odd if you leave all these unspent funds and you're saying, I need more money when you don't have all these unspent funds. So if you have a large amount of unspent funds, you're better off just getting 6, 12-month extension, applying for a phase 2B next year if you want to. The money doesn't carry over to your award. So for those asking, if I have some balance on my phase 2 award, I get a phase 2A or B, does that money move over? And the answer is no. The money does not carry over. Again, it would just be returned to DOE. Level of effort compliance. So again, you do need to pay attention to that, because at the end of every one of your awards, phase 2, 2A, 2B, whatever, you are going to send us a certification that says you complied with the level of effort requirement. So for example, if you had, for example, for a phase 2 award, you have to do 50% of the effort, which allows you to subcontract a fairly large amount. You can subcontract half of it. But if all of a sudden you started subcontracting more than that and you fall below 50%, then you're not complying with the award terms and condition. And DOE can ask you to return money, just the amount you spent plus an equal amount that you met the 50% requirement. But if you spent other funds that went over that 50% for non-company expenses, that we could ask you to return that money even if you've already spent it. So you do need to always pay attention to that. Same thing is very true with an STTR. An STTR, again, the research institution has to do 30%, minimum of 30%. You have to do a minimum of 40%, both phase 1 and 2. And you want to make sure that you're constantly monitoring that and meeting that. If you fail to meet that when you get to the end of your spending for your award, and then DOE will look at that and may take action, and which could include returning funds to make sure that the total amount spent was compliant.
Thank you, Manny. We are wondering if our company applies and is not selected for award, what are the accepted approaches to protesting this decision? Is it an allowed protocol to submit a bid protest through the U.S. Government Accountability Office, or does another protocol apply?
So this is an important distinction you should be aware of when you're working with the federal government. There are two big categories of funding that go out. One is what's called financial assistance. Under financial assistance, that includes grants and cooperative agreements. The other large category is a contract. All of those sometimes are referred to as contracts just informally, but they are very different funding mechanisms and there are different rules associated with them. The term bid protest is something that is associated with a contract. So some agencies do contracts for their SBIR and TCR programs, and you could issue a protest under those agencies that do contracts. We are not one of those agencies. All of our awards are financial assistance, either grants or cooperative agreements. The approach with grants and cooperative agreements, the one thing I would distinguish, the reason they're different the reason a contract is different and can be protested is a contract is used to meet an agency requirement. So for example, if DoD needs some new technology for warfare, they can say DoD needs this new technology and here it is. And it's your job to apply and give us a solution, and they're going to find what they believe the best solution. And you might protest this, believing that you have a better solution than somebody else to meet that DoD requirement. Financial assistance is fundamentally different. It is not trying to meet some requirement for the agency, it is for public benefit. So we use grants, for example, if somebody is going to want to, improve weatherization of homes and things like that. It's not even R&D. Same with R&D. What we're trying to do is advance, let's say, for the things we're funding under this announcement, solar technology or wind technology or even decarbonization or all of those kind of technologies. We're not telling you to do something specific for the agency. We're saying, hey, we're looking for advances that you're going to commercialize in the public sector. And under these types of competitions, all we're saying is we're going to get applications and we're going to fund the ones that we feel are going to have the best impact in the public. Those decisions are not subject to protest. They are not, essentially subject to a third-party review of that. Yeah, the answer to your question is, unfortunately, no, there is no protest or any way to, we tell people that you may want to have an informal discussion with your program manager to learn, why it wasn't as rated as highly as others. But again, under financial assistance, all we're saying is we're going to pick what we believe is the best. We're not saying the people who submitted something wasn't a good proposal. In fact, we have a separate declination letter indicating that, hey, your proposal was fine. There's nothing wrong with it. It was meritorious. It was considered for funding, but we just don't have enough funding to fund all meritorious proposals. So anyway, next question.
Thank you. Can initial phase 2 TABA funds paid to a TABA consultant out of the phase 2 grant be used to aid in the preparation of the commercialization plan section of the phase 2B proposal?
Again, what you should be using your TABA funds for are what you described in your phase 2 application. You should not have described using that to promote a commercialization plan for your next phase 2 application. And again, anytime you're preparing an application, you're generally doing that at your own time and expense, for the bulk of the application. Now, TABA consultants often generate information like market research and other information that are useful to include in your commercialization plan, but they should not be preparing your commercialization plan.
Okay, thank you. The confidential marking rules have changed such that individual sections do not need to be highlighted, underlined, or placed in square brackets, correct? We can just put the legend on one page, and that marking protects everything on the one page, correct?
That is a good question. I think we did just revise that, and I have to confess that I have not looked at that. I will have to go to the FOA and look at that. So I apologize. If you will just submit that to SBIR-STTR@science.doe.gov, they will answer that directly. I apologize. I have not looked at that there was a recent update to that just last year.
Okay, then there is another question. Please confirm, repeat once again, this seminar is about phase 2 A, B, and C, and it's not about phase 2 that should potentially follow a phase 1. Is that correct? Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, and now there's some elements that I discussed, such as peer plans, company commercialization reports, cybersecurity self-assessments that apply to all phase 2 applications. Some of the information I covered in the beginning, but the information on the 2A, 2B, 2C, that was kind of the primary focus here because these are fundamentally, different
Can DOE provide any examples of some acceptable peer plans or generically what these might typically look like?
We don't have any current examples. You know, we've given, as indicated in this presentation, there's also on our website, some discussion of those, but we don't want people to think that those are the only acceptable examples. Again, your peer plans that have been submitted in the past are all confidential, so we can't just pull out other people's peer plans and show them to you. So apologize for that, but we don't have that ability. I mean, that's true for every part of the application. We get people wanting to see a good commercialization plan, a good technical narrative. We cannot actually share those.
In our peer/DEI plan, we plan to mention that we have chosen to work with a technology and business assistance TABA provider that is a minority or woman-owned small business. This would be one aspect of our peer plan, among others. It would help to confirm that it would be appropriate to mention this decision in our peer plan.
Yes, and that would be appropriate. Again, the focus, because that is very much focused on your project team that's going to be working on the project. So anything, you know, subcontractors, you know, consultants, all would be things you could discuss there.
If an application for Phase 2A is not funded, would it be possible to apply for Phase 2B next year after completion of the original phase?
Oh, yeah, and he noted that on the next question that his question was answered. So
yeah,
you know, we already addressed that yet. So thanks.
We addressed that. How can the Phase 2C be from the same FOA as Phase 2A and Phase 2B? The Phase 2 programs from these are just in the second year, and Phase 2A or B have not been awarded yet, as far as I understand.
No, the Phase 2C would have gotten their second Phase 2s from the FOAs, not their. So they would have, yeah, a Phase 2C applicant would have been funded from a funding opportunity announcement 2 years ago and got their second Phase 2 award 2 years ago in 2022.
If our current Phase 2 program was not listed among the eligible topics for Phase 2A, can we still reach out to the program manager to request consideration as an eligible topic for Phase 2A and submit letter of intent?
Yeah, so until the funding opportunities change, you cannot submit for Phase 2A if it's not listed. I mean, if you submitted a Phase 2A application and you're not listed, we would just decline it as ineligible. So I did want you to be aware of that. I mean, you can reach out to your program manager, but as I've indicated, you should have been reaching out to your program manager during the past couple of years, explaining the challenges you're having and suggesting that, you know, you would need a Phase 2A. Now, again, maybe you weren't aware they were available. But yeah, at this point, we have those were probably pretty locked down. You can discuss it with them. If they had in fact, accidentally left you off or something, we can modify the funding opportunity to reflect that. But I don't want to get your hopes up that it routinely happens.
If a firm has a Phase 2 and is not eligible for Phase 2A this year, could it be eligible for Phase 2A next year?
And the answer is no. So the Phase 2A is really intended to be just a continuation of the Phase 2, you know, essentially without a gap. You would just be eligible for the Phase 2B next year.
We have an STTR Phase 2. Could we apply SBIR Phase 2B?
The answer to that is yes. So I did want to point out, you can switch between SBIR and STTR, you know, between any award, you know, except what I talked about Phase 2C, that your whole history of awards needed to be all SBIR to get a Phase 2C. But yeah, if you have a Phase 2 STTR and you want to move to SBIR and Phase 2B, yeah, that's fine. And the same is true when you go from Phase 1 to Phase 2. You can have an STTR Phase 1 and apply for an SBIR Phase 2 or vice versa.
The following question is about the slide deck will be shared. Yes, we will post the recording of the webinar along with a copy of the presentation on our website under Funding Opportunities webpage. So please keep an eye on that page. In 2023, our Phase 2B proposal was approved for funding, but there were inadequate funds. Can we submit a response in this round?
So again, I'm a little confused by your terminology. If you're actually approved for funding, then you would have been funded. If you were not approved for funding, so there's no gray area there. We may have put in our letter that, only the highest ones are funded, and you were among those who are meritorious. That is an indication you were not selected for funding. So I did want to clarify that. So if you applied for Phase 2B in 2023, whether you are eligible this year depends on when you got your original Phase 2 award. Remember, we allow you to apply for Phase 2B during the second year of your Phase 2 and a year later. So if your Phase 2B last year was your first time you were eligible, it was in the second year of your Phase 2 that was awarded in 2021, then you would be eligible this year. If that was, you got a 2020 Phase 2 and the 2023 could have been your last opportunity. So that would depend. I think that's related to the next question. Can you always apply for Phase 2B, even if it's not included in the FOA? And the answer is no. You can only apply for Phase 2B, essentially in the second year of your Phase 2 or the year after. So it is important to understand, like, when you got your Phase 2 to determine when you're eligible for Phase 2B. If you're unclear about that before you prepare an application, go ahead and let us know. You're not sure that you got in the right time, you're eligible for Phase 2B. Send us a note with your award number, and again, to SBIR-STTR, asking them, just want to verify my eligibility to submit for Phase 2B, and our staff will get back to you.
There are no topics listed in the FOA. Where can we find it if our original Phase 1/2 topic is eligible or not for this FOA?
So in 3279, there are only topics listed for Phase 2A. Phase 2B just cites a certain funding opportunity announcements, and those would be the Phase 2 Release 2 from 2021 and 2022. So you don't have to look for your topic. If you were funded under those funding opportunity announcements, you would be eligible.
The individuals who review our proposals commercialization plan work for LARDA. Does LARDA have a contract with the OE SBIR office to perform these reviews?
Yeah, those reviews are not performed by LARDA. We do have a couple subcontractors who work with us to perform those reviews.
Thank you. I don't see any further question in the Q&A box. I just noticed something, Manny, and
Yeah.
I just want to bring to your attention in the slide we have the Phase 2 application process Q&A webinars. I do apologize. We will edit this. The dates are incorrect. They're not in November. We will email you. We will send the invitation to you once we finalize the dates. Okay, I don't see any further questions, Manny.
All right, well, thanks everybody for attending. Have a good weekend.
Thank you, Manny. Thank you. And as we indicated at the beginning of the webinar, the recording and the presentation will be posted on our website. Also, once we finalize the dates for the Phase 2 application process Q&A webinars, we will email you those dates. So look for that email as well. Thank you, everyone, and have a good evening.